Comes from a blue-collar town, Massillon, Ohio, where high school football is so popular on Friday nights you can hear the roar of the crowd from miles away. He's proud to have served his country for 11 years in the U.S. Army. His journey in the airborne infantry ultimately took him to Tal Afar, Iraq, where he was injured by a roadside bomb. Due to his wounds, Jeremiah was medically retired from the Army as a staff sergeant in 2007. His awards include the Purple Heart and the Combat Infantry Badge. Jeremiah's story is one of turning negative events into positive events, actions that serve others. And he'll no doubt tell you about the biggest inspirations in his life, the happy smiles of his two children who love their dad. Please welcome Mr. Jeremiah Pauley.
Woo! You know, I think it's pretty hard to avoid the guy up on stage admiring a red and yellow flower. But it is easy for me to take a few moments to appreciate that flower. You see, I haven't always appreciated all the things that I have in my life. And I'd like to tell you the story of how I learned that lesson. It all started in Iraq. The Army was part of my heart and soul. I was serving my country and extremely proud of it. I was living my dream job. I was a squad leader assigned to the 1st Armored Division. In our platoon, we lived in an Iraqi house. The living conditions were not very good. We didn't even have any running water. And hot meals were something that we were pretty happy to get. On April 8th, 2006, we were on patrol through the city. I'd sent one of my teams into a house to clear it and conduct a search. And I made the decision to go inside to help. Now, all the houses in the city of Tal Afar have a walled-off courtyard in front of them. And as I walked into that courtyard over to my left, I noticed a small garden. And in front of that garden was a white piece of lattice, the kind that you can buy at a home improvement store. And on that lattice were a long green vine and the most beautiful red and yellow flower I have ever seen. And I stood there for what seemed to be an eternity thinking about that flower. I remember asking myself, how could something so beautiful and so unique grow and thrive in such a horrible, disgusting place? Moments later, one of my men said to me, "Sergeant, the house is clear. We didn't find anything." So I gave the signal for my soldiers to move back out to the street. But I stopped. I hesitated. I wanted to take one final look at that flower. If I were going to take something home with me from Iraq, I wanted it to be the memory of that flower. I turned and I walked away, and as I entered the door to the street, the roadside bomb exploded with the loudest noise I'd ever heard. It sent shockwaves through my entire body. Imagine if you were there. Dust so thick in the air you could cut it with a knife. Your ears would be ringing. A metallic taste in your mouth. And the smell of sulfur in your nose. "Get your hand on your weapon! Get your hand on your weapon!" I yelled at myself. But as I looked down, my right arm was just hanging there, not responding. And there was blood all over my uniform, and on my boots, and on the ground. I took a few steps back. "Doc! Doc!" I cried out. Seconds later, a few of my soldiers and our medic rushed into the house. They began applying a bandage to my mangled right arm. Minutes had passed. Off in the distance, I could hear a helicopter. I was placed into a stretcher, and they started carrying me outside. And as they did, I heard the words that would ring in my ears forever. "Missildine is dead." Private First Class Jody Wayne Missildine was 19 years old. He had been in the Army less than a year. He was one of my soldiers. One of the men that I had promised that I would help protect. And at that moment, I thought his death was all my fault. You see, that helicopter was there to take me out of there. I was going to be sent home. Yet one of my men would never go home again. And that guilt was a heart-crushing experience. I was taken to a hospital in Mosul, Iraq. Carried into an operating room, immediately surrounded by doctors and nurses. One of the doctors told me, "Sit up. We need to cut your uniform off of you." I did as he asked, and as I laid back down, I felt this liquid splashing on the back of my neck, going into my ears. I asked the doctor, "Why am I laying in water?" He never answered me. I was laying in a pool of my own blood. Several hours later, I woke in the hospital in that bed. Around my bedside was senior officers and enlisted members. And I had an external fixator sticking out of my right arm, holding it all together. They were there to present me with my Purple Heart. But all I could do was cry. All I could think about was Jody. Sometime shortly after I was injured, I told my father about that flower. He said, "Son, that flower saved your life." But months later, as the survivor's guilt and the hatred and the anger, anxiety entered my heart and my soul, my father, seeing something was wrong with me, he reminded me, "Son, that flower saved your life." But I told him to never talk about that flower again. I told him that I hated that flower. I resented that flower. I blamed that flower for killing Jody and leaving me here to suffer. See, my dad was the kind of man that would give you the shirt off his back. And he taught me about the importance of service, whether it's to your family, to your friends, to your community. I remember one day I was home on leave from Fort Benning, Georgia, and he asked me a question that I'm pretty sure he already knew the answer to. "Son, when are you going to get out of the Army?" I said, "I don't think I'm going to, Dad. I found my calling in life." And he said, "I'm so proud of you that you found something that you're so passionate about. Don't ever let go of it." Well, in 2007, I was medically retired from the Army, and I was devastated. I'd lost my career. I'd lost everything that I had worked so hard for. And I felt as I'd lost all my family and friends in one day. But little did I know that that's when my real problems would begin. J.K. Rowling once said, "Rock bottom is a solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life." I hit rock bottom pretty hard. 3 days after I left the Army, my best friend, my dad, died. He never got to hear this story. 6 months later, my grandmother died of cancer. I was trying to heal from what I had been through, but much like my arm hanging limp there that day, my mind just wasn't responding. I turned into a very angry, nasty, bitter person, and I hurt people close to me. I remember one evening I was sitting on my dining room floor with a lot of paperwork around me. I was going to send in a claim to the Department of Veterans Affairs, but my daughter, 2 years old at the time, she came over and stood on one of those pieces of paper. In an angry outburst, I yelled at her, "Daddy, why are you yelling at me?" I didn't have an answer. I hated who I'd become. I hated my own life. I didn't know what normal was or how to go about finding it. Every day I thought about Jody, and I blamed myself for his death. I don't know if you've ever lost anyone, but I wear his name right here on a bracelet, and I never take it off. Post-traumatic stress disorder took over my life. I became a statistic. I became one of an estimated over 400,000 returning soldiers from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan suffering from PTSD. Anger, anxiety, depression, survivor's guilt were all part of my normal everyday life. I hated going to bed at night. Have you ever went to bed and wished that you wouldn't wake up the next morning? I have. Have you ever woke in the morning wishing you had died the night before so that you didn't have to spend any time with your family and your friends? I have. Between 2007 and 2010, I had 5 different jobs. Couldn't find a job where I could fit in. Couldn't find a job where I could get along with everyone. In 2009, when my son was born, it was supposed to be a day of a new flower blooming. 2 days after we brought him home from the hospital, he stopped breathing and turned blue. He spent the next 6 weeks in the hospital having every test imaginable run on him. Today, I'm proud to say that he's a very happy and healthy 4-year-old. But at the time, I sunk further into depression, and I avoided all the good things in my life. I avoided spending quality time with my family and my friends. And it cost me friendships, and it cost me relationships. I avoided eating healthy and exercise, and I gained over 60 pounds. I avoided leaving my own house. And when I did leave, I couldn't wait to come back home and sit on my couch. That couch had become my comfort zone. Nightmares, terrible, terrible nightmares. Always very similar to each other. And one, I would be in the checkout line at the grocery store. And when it was my turn to pay, boom! The roadside bomb would explode. And another, I was walking down the street in Iraq. The bomb exploded. Instantly, I knew Jody had been killed. Yet there's this unfamiliar voice screaming at me, "It's all your fault! It's all your fault!" I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, out of breath, thinking that I was in Iraq, still battling for my life. I'd often look down at my bracelet, looking for answers from Jody, but they never came. One night, I came very close to taking my own life. I was looking for something positive in my life. I guess you could say that I was looking for a flower, but one that wouldn't blow up in my face. In the fall of 2011, I received a phone call from Wounded Warrior Project. They asked me if I wanted to attend an event called Soldier Ride. Soldier Ride is a multi-city bicycle tour. We invite wounded veterans out for the weekend, and we ride bikes together. When I arrived in Phoenix, I met some of the most amazing people that work for this organization. I was hugged and high-fived and thanked for my service. And for the first time in a long time, I felt appreciated. But being so negative from the PTSD, I said, "I can't ride that bike. I'm just going to sit over there and watch." They said, "Yes, you can. We believe in you." And I started to get excited. I met a lot of other warriors that weekend as well. I met a Marine leg amputee that climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I met another warrior that was training for the Paralympics. I met a set of brothers that changed my life, Eric and Devin Shy. Eric was in the Army and he was shot in the head by a sniper in Iraq. He's now a quadriplegic confined to a wheelchair and requires 24-hour-a-day medical assistance. His brother Devin, upon learning that Eric was injured, well, he joined the Army too. Devin was shot 4 times while serving in Afghanistan. But Devin pedaled his brother Eric 25 miles on a tandem bicycle through that Arizona desert. And along the way, some other rides would come up behind and help push that bike along. And I'm very proud and humbled to say that I was one of those warriors. And I immediately went home and started to think about that weekend. When I got home, I noticed that I was all alone. You see, my selfish behavior, my self-destructive behavior, I had alienated all the good things in my life. And I started to cry. As I sat there alone crying, I started thinking about the last time that I cried. I didn't cry when my son was in the hospital. I didn't cry when I couldn't hold down a job to support my family. I didn't cry when my grandmother died. I didn't cry when my father died. The last time I had cried, I was in that hospital bed. But because I had become so selfish, I questioned, was I crying for me? Or was I crying for the person I should have been crying for, Jody? It's right then that I made the decision to change my life, to become a happier person, a more positive person, a person that appreciates all the things that he has in his life. You see, I stepped outside my comfort zone that weekend, and you know what I found? I found happiness and excitement, new family and friends. I found something else that weekend in that Arizona desert. I found that flower that I was looking for, and that flower is Wounded Warrior Project. Because of Wounded Warrior Project, my ability to appreciate all the things in my life has truly blossomed. And I realize that I have a lot of special flowers in my life. I have 2 wonderful children. My daughter Grace is 8. My son Jacob will be 5 in 3 weeks, and we have a lot of fun together. Not too long ago, we were out to lunch, and my little girl, she looks up at me and she says, "Dad, God made a lot of things." And I said, "Yeah, that's right, baby." And she never took her big blue eyes off of me, and she said, "But everything else is made in China." It's moments like that that I've learned to appreciate. Even my son, he has this almost sarcastic wit about him. And that my kids know that Dad was in the Army and, they got hurt by a bad guy in Iraq. But they kind of think it was because I was shot, because it's much easier to teach them about, a gun than it is a bomb. Anyway, one night, coming home from school, my son looks at me and she says, "Dad, how come how come you didn't see the bad guy that shot you?" I said, "Well, I just didn't, Jacob. I wasn't looking." He's like, "Well, all you had to do was turn around." And he tells me, he says, "I tell you what, when we get home, I'm going to teach you how to do it. But don't hurt my arm like they did yours." And that's just the innocence of the 4-year-old right there, I guess. But again, that's just another moment in my life that, because of Wounded Warrior Project, I've learned to appreciate. Probably the biggest thing that I've ever had to endure is the survivor's guilt. I think about Jody every day. I felt guilty that I wasn't able to attend his memorial service because I was in the hospital. I felt guilty that I wasn't able to attend his funeral because I was in the hospital. Now, Jody was from Plant City, Florida. He was raised by his grandparents. And with the help of some very special people at Wounded Warrior Project, I made the trip from San Francisco, California to Plant City to visit Jody's family. I wanted to pay my respects to his family. I wanted to pay my respects to him and visit where he's buried. Upon contacting his family, in the back of my mind, I thought if they blame me for what happened to Jody, I wouldn't be able to live with it. But they were so excited that I was coming. They wouldn't let me stay in a hotel room. They let me stay there in their own home. In the afternoon that I arrived there in Florida, they invited their entire family over. And I told them everything that I know about Jody, from the day that I met him up until the day that he was killed. I even had a chance to go and visit Jody where he's buried, pay my respects, tell him that I was proud of him, that I loved him, and that his family and friends miss him. And I promised him that it wouldn't be another 7 years before I came back to visit him. The day that I was leaving Florida to come back home, I took his grandparents out to lunch one final time. And we sat there and we talked about life and happiness and family and all the important things that we have. And as I go to get in my car to leave, his grandfather comes up to me and he starts pulling something out of his pocket. And I immediately see what it is. It's a gold star pin. Now, gold star pins are given to the families of the fallen. And I put my arms and hands up in protest and I say, "Sir, I cannot accept that. That's only for family." He said, "Well, I want you to have it. You're my family now." And I took that pin and I held it in my hand. And as I started crying in front of Jody's grandfather, he reached up and he put his right arm on my left shoulder. He said, "Let it go, son. It's not your fault." I take that memory right there with me and I carry it everywhere I go. But it's only because of Wounded Warrior Project that memory is alive and well within me. So I guess you could say that one of the flowers in my life is Jody's family. And I'm very proud and honored and humbled by that. I used to hate that flower, curse that flower, resent a flower. But today I use it as a tool for me to find more things in my life that inspire me, to find more things in my life to appreciate. I think it's ironic that a flower, it looks perfectly in place in a beautiful landscape, yet it has the ability to grow and thrive in the deepest and darkest of places. What's your flower? Thank you. Thank you very much. Rhonda, do you want me to do a Q&A? We have time? Yeah, Q&A. I want to thank Rhonda for bringing me out here today. It's been truly a pleasure. So nice to finally meet you. I've heard so many good things about you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here for Wounded Warrior Project. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have about what our organization does, how we're making a difference, and in fact, more importantly, how we're saving and impacting lives every day. I don't see anything offhand, so I'm going to say one final comment. Our logo depicts one warrior carrying another warrior, moving forward off the field of battle. By being here today, you're part of our logo. We call it Living the Logo. You see, there's some warriors out there among you today that are living this logo in their daily lives right now. By being here today, donating your time, donating your money, you're living our logo. You may not know it, you may not see it directly, but you are helping change, save, and impact lives. Thank you all so very much.
Jeremiah, thank you very much. Let's toast to Jody, by the way, a fallen hero. And now introducing Jeff Thurman.